sun was setting over all that water, and all that snow was coming down out of the sky, and the fog was descending upon us, Pat Coffey looked out the window and said, "This is so different from where I live." The understatement of the year. Do y'all take the almanac?
Oh, yeah.
They didn't raise their hand. They look like Methodists. Here's the weather report for the Northeast. April and May will be rainier than normal with below normal temperatures. Here's the weather report for Atlantic Corridor. April and May will be slightly warmer and drier than normal. Here's the weather report for the Appalachians. April and May will be cooler and drier than normal. Here's the weather report for Florida. April and May will be practically perfect for anybody 65 years and older. And here's the weather report for y'all. Lower Lakes region. April and May will be colder than a witch's tit in a brass bra, which is completely or near normal. I was horrified when I got off the airplane and the stewardess shared with us the local temperature and weather report. What is wrong with y'all? You need to take the almanac. Easter was last Sunday. I left my hotel and walked down here through all of that devil's dandruff and came in, and one of you, who shall remain nameless, but her name sounds like a cuss word in German, stood over at the window and looked out at all that snow falling down and wistfully said, "If we have accumulation, they'll call this a sugar snow." And I thought, Lord of mercy, if we have nuclear holocaust, everybody will see the fallout, start wishing each other happy Christmas. Crazy. And then I turned around to look at the buffet, or as my Aunt Nana would say, the buffet. And y'all, it's seersucker season with white shirts, and you're serving red splattery spaghetti sauce. And that same woman, whose last name sounds like a cuss word, turned around and looked me up and down as I was trying to maneuver through those meatballs, and she said, "Well, one thing that I always like about a conference like this, if you don't find anything you want to emulate, at least you can see things that you never want to make the same mistake." What was that supposed to mean? It was terrible. And then I come in here and I watch Pat Coffey looking out there and says, "Nothing like this at home." And all of a sudden, there's a big blast of a steam whistle. And I said, "What's that?" And those people sitting right back there, they're from the north side of the lake, but it doesn't show, not the least bit. And they said, "Oh, that's to let the students know that dark is descending, and if they're in a sailboat, to come off the lake." And I thought, oh, they really don't read the almanac. Never in my life have I seen such a place. I immediately picked up the phone and called the Baptist Student Union, and I said, "Send missionaries. They don't have the good sense to come in when it's snowing on the lake." Then the concert started. And Jennifer got up and told a story. And Lauren got up and told a story. And you could have heard a pin drop. And because I didn't want to disturb, I didn't call the Baptist Student Union. I just sent them a text message. And I said, "Cancel the dispatch of a missionary team. These people have mamas that teach their daughters how to make perfect pie crusts. And storytellers who have been given lifetime achievement awards and still face the ghosts that haunt them, to let us know you should never be ashamed to smell like cinnamon. They have their prophets, and I consider it a great honor to stand with them." We won't discuss when I asked that little girl who was helping with the banquet for butter for my biscuit. She said, "That's focaccia." And I said, "We don't use language like that." Y'all really need to take the almanac. Now this is the almanac, the yellow covered old farmer's almanac. They have one that's got a blue cover. I wouldn't feed my dog by the dates in that blue cover almanac. That's dangerous living right there. You need the yellow old farmer's almanac. It's very, very important. You know, those Rourkes, they always took the almanac. You remember the Rourkes lived over there across Pine Mountain on Line Fork? Yeah, the Rourkes. There was Monty and Godsey Rourke. They were the last of the generation, but there were all kind of Rourkes over there. You're looking at me askance. You probably knew the other side of the family, what pronounced the name Roark. Yes, that was the side of the family that had money. This was the Rourkes. Yeah, you know, Godsey and Monty Rourke. Now, they had the good sense to always take the almanac. Always, every year they got the almanac, got it by mail delivery, so they wouldn't miss anything. And right in the middle of the almanac, there's a calendar, you know, and you pull that calendar out, and you can hang it on a nail up on your kitchen wall and keep up with all the important dates, how many Sundays till Easter, and when Rogation Sunday is, and all that kind of stuff. And if you look on the calendar real careful, some of the most important dates are in fine print. They're called amber days. And them amber days are very, very important. They come around 4 times a year. There's amber days in the spring, summer, winter, and fall. And you've got to be real conscious of them amber days. Now, if you look at the notation that's highlighted with a little star at the bottom of the page, it'll tell you that way long time ago, the Pope put the amber days on the calendar, and they were special holy days, additional holy days when he could add clergy to parishes, and the Catholics would starve themselves and things like that. That's what Catholics like to do. And but any Protestant will tell you that's when the devil rides patrol. And if you are to swear a false oath on an amber day, the old devil will make it stick. Well, Godsey and Monty Rourke, they had their calendar up there on the wall, but the nail slipped out, and the calendar fell down behind the kitchen table, and they forgot all about it. Well, Godsey Rourke was sitting in a chair. He had his legs stretched out in front of him, and he was reading the newspaper, and his wife, Monty, she was sweeping around with a broom. And he had them big old long legs stuck out there, and she tripped over his boots and fell in the floor. Well, when his wife tripped and fell, before he could think about it, he burst out laughing. Well, that hurt her feelings. And she jumped up and she said, "What are you doing laughing at me like that? Godsey Rourke, look at them long legs. You ain't nothing but a mule from the waist down." He said, "Stop your braying, woman. You ain't nothing but a jackass from the neck up." And it was an amber day. All of a sudden, she went to a braying and a carrying on, and he looked up from his newspaper, and she had the head of a mule from the neck up. Yeah, big old set of yeller teeth, and them big long ears sticking up out the top of her head, and it scared Monty, and Godsey Rourke scared him so bad, he jumped up out of his chair, and when he jumped up out of his chair, he hit his head on the ceiling. He is a good head and a half taller than he was just seconds earlier, and he looked down, he had the legs of a mule. He had busted right out of his overalls, and they were hanging around his neck like a bib, and he had hindquarters sticking out the back and a tail swishing off the end. He said, "Oh, look alive, we done swore a false oath, and it's bound to be an amber day, and look what's happened to us. Well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?" Well, his wife, Monty, she's happy to tell him what to do. She did that on a regular occasion, but on this occasion, she couldn't do that and say, "Ee-haw, ee-haw, ee-haw," like that. She said that she's so ashamed to look at herself in the looking glass, she threw her apron up over her head and just sat there braying to herself. And then it occurred to Godsey, if there's anything to be done, it would be Solomon Grundy who knew what to do about it. Now, Solomon Grundy, he lived over in the next county. That's kind of like being on the north side of the lake. He lived over in the next county, and he was a very religious man. He had read the whole Bible in the original languages. King James English. Yeah. If that's good enough for St. Paul, it's good enough for Solomon Grundy. And they figured if there's anybody who could help them, it would be Solomon. So Godsey left his wife sitting in a chair, and he took off across Pine Mountain over into the next county and come up to Solomon Grundy's house. He ran up to the window, and he said, "Solomon, come over here. I got to show you something." Well, Solomon wondered how he had gotten up on such a high place to look through the window. Must have been standing on an old milk bucket or something. He said, "Get down off that bucket and come in the house and show me." He said, No, I think it best if you come over here." So he come and he looked out the window and he said, "Lord of mercy, what has happened to you?" He said, "Well," he said, "I had my legs stretched out in front of me. I was reading the newspaper, and my wife's trying to sweep up the house. She tripped over my legs and she fell, and she said that I was a mule from the waist down." And and it was an amber day. And he said, what did you say to your wife? He said, you better come and look. She's got the head of a mule. He said, well, the head of a mule and you with hindquarters, what do you want me to do about it? He said, well, you know, on the way over here, I was thinking on what we could do. And if there's some way you can get her head and my hindquarters and put them together, we would trade a real fine plowing animal for 3 of them shoats your sow shunted a week from Tuesday. Now, you take the almanac. You know what I'm talking about when a sow shunts shoats. That's a pig has babies. That's what that is. He said, we'll trade you 3 little pigs for that mule. He said, well, now, I can't trade a mule unless I look at your wife's teeth. He said, well, get on my back. I carry you over there. So he got on his back. He pulled them overall breeches up and held them like reins and clicked his heels in, and they took off down the road. Before they had gone far, they had passed by Fiddlin' John's house. Old Fiddlin' John, he's sitting out on the front porch sawing a tune for Saturday night dance. He looked up and seen them coming down the road, got so scared he saw his fiddle right in half and ruined the fine instrument. Ran in the house and slammed the door. Next place they went by was the preacher's house, and the preacher had come out with 2 big old buckets full of water. He's getting ready to water his tomato patch. And when he come over there to the tomato patch, he seen Godsey Rourke come running up and had Solomon Grundy on his back. Godsey had worked up a lather, and he was yelling. He said, preacher, it'd be real Christian of you if you used to give me a slurp of that water. The preacher looked up and said, oh, my Lord, it's one of them horse critters from the book of the Revelation. And he threw down his buckets and ran in the house and slammed his door. Finally, they got back over there to Line Fork up on the other side of Pine Mountain, come through the door, and there's Mondia sitting there. It took a half hour for him to get her to put her apron down so that Solomon Grundy could look at her face. He checked her out. She did have a real good set of teeth. They were still nice and sharp and bright yellow. He looked over at all of the hindquarters, and he said, yeah, you got real good, strong hindquarters. You know, that's where the power is in a plowing animal. It's all in the haunches. You know, yeah. Check out the rear end of the horse. That's where it's at. He said, this would make a good plowing animal, except you don't got no neck to stick the 2 together, and I can't trade 3 pigs for a stumpy neck mule. And Godsey Rourke said, what are we going to do? He said, well, if there's any antidote for devil poison, it's going to be in the Bible. Fetch me a copy of the good book. Well, that took another hour because the Rourkes, they had that Bible laid up somewhere. It's covered in an inch of dust. You know the Rourkes, Godsey Rourke, they don't never go to church except on Christmas. They sat in the midnight service on Christmas. Godsey Rourke sits on the back row singing, no hell, no hell, like that. Yes, the heathen, that's what they are. They only kept the Bible for recording births and deaths and hitting Bible knots with. Y'all, look at there. She just turned to her friend and said, I Googled that. There's no such a thing as a Bible knot. That's because you don't read the almanac. Now, let me help you out. Excuse us. Just discuss among yourselves why I help this poor soul here. I'll give you a topic. Why do people park on driveways, drive on parkways? Discuss. So, a Bible knot. That you get a swelling up on your wrist, and you go to the doctor, and he'll call that a ganglion cyst and charge you a $50 copay and give you some calcium medicine. That's a Bible knot. Just get the Bible, whack it, it'll go down. That's what that is. It's a Bible knot. So that's all they ever kept a copy of the good book for. So finally, they found the Bible stuck up on a high shelf, and they opened it up, and Solomon Grundy went into reading. He started in with the creation of the world, and then he read about Adam and Eve, and then he read about their children, he read about the Tower of Babel, and then he read about, there was all kind of things. And finally, he come to it. He said, right here, as the children of Israel were marching through the Exodus 11:22, he was reading about Balaam's talking donkey. And he said, Balaam struck the donkey thrice with a stick. That's what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to hit you 3 times with a stick. Well, Monty went to braying again. He said, it's in the Bible, ain't it? It's in the Bible. You can't argue with Holy Writ. So he went out and broke down a limb, and she stood for it. He whacked her 3 times, and her mule head come off, and she is as pretty as any of them Rourke women are ever going to be. And then he whacked her husband 3 times, and his hindquarters came off, and he is regular again. And everybody that lives over there in Line Fork said them hindquarters and that mule head sucked together, and that strange thing jumped up over the mountain. You could see it silhouetted against the moon. That thing had cloven hooves like old Nick himself. And then Monty turned to Solomon, and she said, Solomon, you a good neighbor to help us out like that. And since it's gotten right late, would you stay for a little bit of supper? And he said that he would. While she was frying up some stuff, she said, I'm sorry that we put you out. You wouldn't have had to have so much trouble if my husband wasn't such a... And they clapped her hands over there, man, before she said something she'd regret, because there's another hour on that clock before that Amber Day scratched off, and they didn't want to say anything she might regret. Y'all, get an almanac. I heard your new president, I think it was, said that the Kentucky Storytelling Association had issued a call and invited you all from the North Woods to send in applications to be presenters at their conference. Did I understand that correctly? Yes. And then they said that the conference in November would take place in Harlan, Kentucky. That's where I was born, y'all. Yeah, so I had been praying for the last 24 hours, mainly about the snow. I'm hoping I can get home tomorrow. But when I wasn't praying about that, I was trying to figure out what in the heck I'm going to tell y'all. Because somebody, I think her name was Dot. Her name does not sound like cuss words in German. But she emailed me like 6 weeks ago and said, this is what Jennifer's telling, this is what Lauren's telling, what are you going to tell? And I emailed back undecided, and she thought that was the title, and wrote that down in official communications. I really didn't know. I'd never been in this region before. I didn't know how much y'all could stand. I thought, well, at least I'll wear a seersucker and they'll be cross-eyed, so if I have to make a quick getaway, I can work my way through the crowd. And then they said you had been invited to come to Harlan County, Kentucky, and I thought, that's why God sent me here. I need to tell you what you're in for. I live in South Carolina now, but I was born and raised in Kentucky. So I say South Carolina feeds me, but it's all Kentucky's fault. And when I was a little boy growing up in Harlan County, my mama and daddy wanted me to know that there was a great big world out there, well beyond those Appalachian Mountains. And they wanted me to know about that. They knew that I probably would make my life out there somewhere. So they did what every great mom and dad did for my generation. They bought me World Book Encyclopedia. Yes. You had a good mom and dad when you were a kid. Yeah. Did y'all have the blue with the silver? Ours were brown with the gold edging all around. Yes, because my daddy was a preacher. So they looked better with the Bible and the theological books. And so they bought me World Book Encyclopedia. Now, my friend Britt, he was a very close friend. We played together all the time. His mom and dad went the extra mile, and they signed up for a book club called Childcraft. Yes, the good old Childcraft books. And about every 6 weeks, a book would come to you in the mail, and you got a huge library by default because your mom could send a response card in to cancel at any time, but she would always forget, and then here would come another book that she had to pay for. So one summer afternoon, Britt called me on the telephone, and he said, I got a new Childcraft, and it's all about Indians. Come down, come down. So I jumped on my bicycle and I rode down to Britt's house, and we spread out on the floor rug in front of the fireplace. Do y'all know what a floor rug is? It's a rug that looks like a floor. You know, that you put them out in the summer, and they have like designs painted on them. And then you put that away, and you put out a wool rug in the winter. But your summer dress is a floor rug, because it's a rug that looks like a floor. Do you understand that? See me later. Yeah. So we stretched out and laid on the cool floor rug and looked all through that Childcraft, all about Indian tribes of North America. Well, we loved that. And so being boys and being young, we just, the way children assimilate all that information is they're going to play that. So we said we wanted to play Indian. Now, Britt's mom is one of the great moms of the world. Now she's one of the great grandmoms of the world. But she said, all right, you boys want to play Indian? I'll help you out. She went in the rag bag and came back with a couple old shirts, and she chopped the sleeves off and used her sewing scissors to fringe the bottom of the shirt. She said, there, now you've got you some vests you can wear. So we put on our Indian vest. She gave us an old lipstick. We smeared that on. We had war paint. And then she said, now, go outside and do not come back in here. Because that's what great moms of the world do. They push you outdoors to let you realize not everything you read in that book is necessarily so. So she pushed us outside. So we hit the porch with, I had a bow and arrow set with rubber stopper arrows. Britt had this big long spear made out of a shaft of bamboo, had a rubber head on the top. It was genuine made by Cherokee Indians. You know how we knew it was genuine made by Cherokee Indians? It had a little tag on it that said genuine made by Cherokee Indians. Years later, when I visited Cherokee, North Carolina, I asked an Indian man about that, and he said, oh yeah, I can tell you about that. He said, the shaft comes from Taiwan, the rubber head comes from Vietnam, they ship them to us in separate boxes. He said, I put them together with a glue gun, put that tag on there, sell it to white people like you. So we got all that authentic Indian junk, and we hit the front porch, and there stood my sister. I want to play. You're a girl. I still want to play. You're still a girl. There were girl Indians. Dang it, we cannot argue with that. We've seen them in the book. All kinds of girl Indians. Every tribe had some. Okay. You can be a girl Indian. So we started off toward the woods, and I said, now we've got to have Indian names. You know, I was the biggest of the kids, so I said, I know what my Indian name is going. I'm going to be Tall Man. That's my Indian name. And Britt immediately said, oh, I've got my name and your sister's name. He had a record, and on the record there was a song that went, Running Bear loves little white dove with a light. You were Cherokee when you was a kid. Yeah, and the background singer's going, ooga chaka, ooga chaka. It's very authentic. He said, I'll be Running Bear and your sister can be White Dove. Now, my sister always had a baby doll with her. She usually carried it by the head. And she always had a big baby doll she was lugging around. So I turned to her and said, what's your baby's name? She said, Libby. That is not an Indian name. I don't care. It's my baby and her name is Libby. No, you got a name her like cries a lot. No, her name is Libby. Fine. God has a sense of humor. When I grew up, I had no idea back then that I would adopt children, and my 9-year-old daughter is Indian, and you know what her name is? Libby. Yes, that is an authentic Indian name. I've got the Indian to prove it. So off we go. Tall Man, White Dove, Running Bear, and Libby. We got a bunch of sticks and leaned them up against a pine tree, made ourselves a lean-to, and we crawled in there, and we're poking in the dirt and slapping bugs. And I said, this is like real Indians. And Britt says, real Indians had food. I'm hungry. I said, well, let's go back to the house and get something to eat. He said, you heard my mom. Do not come back in here. So we hatched a plan. We went down to the creek, and we fished out some rocks from in the water, and they were all nice and shiny. We put them in our pockets, and we went to the back door and pecked on the door. She came to the porch, and she started, I told you boys. Britt said, we're not boys. We are real live Cherokee Indians. And then he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out rocks, and he said, oh, white woman, we will trade you these 5 stones for 3 Indian hot dogs. She's great mom of the world, so she played along. She said, well, you know, my husband is a trapper. Things are not going well between my people and your people, and if I don't get a better trade than that, there could be trouble, and I really would not like my husband to cause your people trouble. So I reached in my pocket and I said, I've got a dead frog and some string. She said, I'll take the string. So she traded stones and strings. She gave us 3 hot dogs, wrapped them with an axe. She take these back to your teepee and eat them. So we're sitting in the lean-to eating the hot dogs. I said, now we're like real Indians. We got Indian names and we got Indian food. Britt said, this ain't Indian food. Indians did not eat hot dogs. They hunted the buffalo. White Dove saw trouble and she took Libby and moved back east. That left us free to ride the western plains in search of a herd of buffalo. We didn't have a buffalo, but Britt's papaw had a Hereford beef cow. That's pretty much like a buffalo. So we're crawling through the high grass of the lower pasture, shooting rubber stopper arrows and screaming and yelling, and the cows running around. And all of a sudden we heard a gunshot. And we looked up, and it's Britt's papaw's got the gun. He's standing up on his porch on the other side of the pasture, and he yells down and says, stop chasing the cow. Well, now, he wasn't my blood kin, so I wouldn't have sassed him. But he was Britt's blood kin. Britt yelled back, there ain't no cow, that's our buffalo. And he went, shh, stop chasing the buffalo then. And then he get up here. So we came up on the porch. He really wasn't shooting at us. He had been shooting off the other end of the porch. On the other end of the porch, he could see his corn. And he was sitting on the porch swing and shooting blackbirds out of the corn. He just used a shot to make a point, so to speak. We do that in Kentucky, yeah. We don't mean to kill anybody. We just think everybody's more well-behaved at the point of a gun. It's a cultural thing. So he's sitting there on the porch swing shooting at blackbirds, and he says, I'm going to need your help. Sit down. So we sat down, and he would watch for birds to come down in the corn. He'd take a shot, and you'd see a bird fall, and he'd say, wait, safety first, safety first. He'd put the gun up right, and then he'd yell, "Fetch!" And we'd run out there and grab the dead blackbird and bring it back. We were his bird dogs all afternoon. We'd catch dead blackbirds. Pretty soon we had a big pile of blackbirds and crows laying on the end of the porch. He put the gun away and he said, "You boys want to know something about Indians?" He said, "What you got your mama's Avon all over your face for?" I said, "We're Cherokee." He said, "You ain't no Cherokee." I said, "I'll show you something." He went over to the edge of the corn patch and he took out a big old pocket knife and he sliced the end of a corn cob off of a green stalk. He pulled all the leaves away from it and he yanked 3 feathers out of a dead crow's wing and he stuck them down in that corn cob and he threw it up in the air and that thing went and came down like a little helicopter. He said, "That there's called a whirligig." That's the Indian word. I had never seen that in World Book Encyclopedia. But as he had a .22 rifle with a scope, who was I to argue? He said, "Now I'm going to show you something else." He took his knife and he cut the crow's leg off. And he held the leg up and there were some tendons hanging out the end of the crow's leg. And he pulled those tendons and that old crow's claw would go. He'd let go and they'd spring back. He pulled again. And then he said, "That there's an Indian yo-yo." Well, we were completely taken in. "How'd you learn so much about Indians?" He said, "I didn't read it out in no book." And then he looks at Britt and he says, "I like Indians so good, I married me one." You did?" He said, "Where's your grandmama from?" "Oklahoma." He said, "That book tell you anything called Trail of Tears?" "Yes, sir. Indian Removal Act, all the Cherokee, other tribes, but the Cherokee in particular from this area, they were all rounded up and they were forced to march out to Oklahoma. People died along the way. That's why they called it." We had read it. We knew about it. He said, "Your grandmama's grandmama walked the Trail of Tears." Man, we dropped all that fake Indian junk. We ran in the house. Granny was in the kitchen, where grannies are always supposed to be. And she was in the kitchen. We said, "Granny, are you a Cherokee Indian?" She said, "I'm half. My mama was full-blooded Oklahoma band Cherokee." And she said, "Your grandpa, after he was in the Army, drove a Greyhound bus. And when he came to Oklahoma, he said he couldn't come back to Kentucky without me. So I married him and came back to Kentucky." He said, "All my people live in Oklahoma." "And your grandmama walked the Trail of Tears?" She said, "Mm-hmm." She said, "I never knew her, but there are stories. Will you tell us?" "Well, I got beans that need strung." We grabbed the beans and started stringing beans. We strung all the beans. She'd get right to a good part. We said, "Tell us some more." She said, "I got potatoes that need peeled." We started peeling potatoes. We cooked the whole dinner as long as we could keep her talking. But after that, we couldn't play Indian anymore. I mean, we were living with the real thing. So we went back to World Book Encyclopedia, tried to find something else that we could act out, and we hit on World War II. My house was the perfect place for playing World War II because I lived next to the river and we were going to reenact Pearl Harbor on account of all the whiskey bottles. I lived, at that time, Harlan County was a dry county. Now they call it a moist county. I don't know what that means. Like, you can sell liquor on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but not Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I have no idea what a moist county is. But the neighboring county was wet, soaking wet. And I mean, it was so wet that I was telling this story one time to a group of retirees, and a man said, "Oh, you're from Harlan County. I used to go there on business about 3 times a year." And I said, "Oh, did you work in the coal mines?" He said, "FBI." I said, "I know where you went most of the time, too." So if you wanted stuff, the bootleggers, they all went up to the neighboring county and would load up their pickup truck. Y'all know how to haul, right, in a pickup truck? You don't even have to cover it. No, you put all the hooch in the floor of the pickup truck and then put your 12 kids in on top of it. And when you drive down the road, the truck's all weighted down, but it just looks like it's all those big fat kids you got in the back of the truck. And you can go home. They don't even want to stop you for hauling. I mean, everybody knew how to do it. And so if you wanted stuff, you knew where to go. But if the law got after you, you just throw everything in the river. And then when spring rains came, that's what we had instead of snow this time of year. It would wash everything away and all the evidence was gone. So on the riverbank next to my house, there'd be all kind of whiskey bottles laying around. Perfect for playing Pearl Harbor. Britt and I would go down there and we'd get a bunch of grass and stick it in the top of several Jack Daniels bottles and so kind of cork them up a little bit, and we'd throw them out in the middle of the river. And then we'd stand up on the railroad and we'd get those big railroad rocks and we'd hurl them down on the whiskey bottles, and we were the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor. You'd hit a whiskey bottle and that thing would bust and sink right down like the USS Arizona. And then, of course, we would feel bad about doing that. So we'd make a daisy wreath and have a wreath-laying ceremony. That would kind of justify the whole thing. One time we went down to the river to play Pearl Harbor, and the bootleggers had switched to cans of Pabst Blue Ribbon. You can't make a USS Arizona with a Pabst Blue Ribbon can. So I was poking around with a stick in the weeds, and I found a treasure, an unopened can. So I picked it up, and I started shaking it, and I said, Britt, you remember how World War II ended? He said, yeah, the bomb on Hiroshima. I said, right here is a bomb called Fat Boy, and we're about to fly a plane called the Enola Gay and drop the bomb. And I started shaking that thing. The top and bottom of that aluminum can started bulging out. And then he said, wait. We have to distribute leaflets over the industrial centers of Japan to tell them that the bomb is about to fall before we... So he grabbed up a dandelion and went, whoo! He said, the leaflets have been distributed, bombs away. I flung that can up in the air, and when it hit the ground, we were covered in nuclear fallout. Well, my daddy's a Baptist preacher, so we could not go back to the house. He would beat us within an inch of our life if we came home smelling like that. So we went down to Poppy's house. We left our bicycles in the front of the house. We walked up on the front porch. He said, what's that smell? We said, nuclear fallout. We're World War II veterans. He said, you smell like some of my buddies at the VFW, but you ain't no World War II veteran. Sit down. We sat down. He said, you want to know something about World War II? I didn't read it out in no book. I fought it. That's what he said. Pretty much every other time this subject came up, he couldn't help himself. He would say, I won it. He did not talk about it often, and if he did, it was usually just the briefest mention. And if you pressed him, he would very quickly change the subject. And we never knew if that was because it caused him pain or if he thought we were not old enough to hear gory details. We never did really know. But that day, I think because he wanted to make sure we were getting it right, he talked. And he told us that he was a ball turret gunner during the war. And he flew missions from England over Germany, bombing Berlin. And then on the way back, he sat in the back of that plane, firing at Nazi planes that were chasing them down. And his plane got shot down. And he was a prisoner of war in France for a while. And that was the part that he never would fill in the story. But he did take us into his bedroom, and he lifted the lid on a trunk and showed us his Purple Heart. And there was some old papers next to it, and we want to know what that was. And he said, well, I qualified for a second Purple Heart, and that's the papers, but I've never sent them in. And when we asked him why he had never sent them in, he just shrugged and said, that'd be selfish now, wouldn't it? Well, we couldn't play that anymore. We were living with a decorated war hero. We figured we're going to have to find something we can play that happened so long ago there are no survivors to tell us how to do it. Being sons of the South, we chose the Civil War. We decided we wanted to reenact the Battle of Gettysburg because the South didn't do so good. And that was what we wanted, blood and guts and an opportunity to fall down flat. I had a little toy cannon. It was about this long. It shot a blast that was about as loud as a 20-gauge shotgun. And so we were at my house, and I said, all right, we'll put the cannon up on the porch, and the other one can go behind the goat shed and give a rebel yell and come running out, and then bam, hit the cannon, splatter it on the grass. Britt says, good, who's going to be General Grant? I said, I can't be General Grant. My people fought for the South. He says, so did mine. I can't be General Grant. So we went and looked in the encyclopedia, and we saw a picture of General Grant. It was a picture from the latter years of the war, and his beard had started to gray up a good bit. He had a long gray beard. Well, I had a goat that had a long gray beard. We said, let's make the goat General Grant. So we jumped on our bicycles, and we rode to the store, and we bought a cigar, because we saw a picture of General Grant smoking a cigar. They would sell a kid tobacco if you told him it was for your goat, General Grant. And so we got the cigar, came back, and I tied a rope around General Grant's neck and put him on a stake in the front yard. We poked that stogie in his mouth. He played his role very well. He's bossing everybody around. Britt got the cannon up on the porch, and I got behind the shed, and I yelled, are you ready? Because I couldn't see him from behind the shed. I said, are you ready? He said, I'm ready if you're ready. I said, well, I'm not going to go unless you're ready. He said, when you're ready, I'll be. That's how the Civil War went. We got everything we could find to kill each other, and we lined up and said, "Are you ready? I'm ready if you're ready." South wasn't as ready as we thought we were going to be. So I came running out with a rebel yell, and Britt hit that cannon, bam! We did not know that General Grant was gun shy. And that goat jumped up on his hind legs and pulled that rope taut and clothesline Pickett's charge. My feet went up even with my heels, and I hit the ground, and it knocked the breath out of me. And I'm rolling on the ground trying to catch my breath. And Britt is laughing. It is a mortal sin to laugh at the Confederate falling. When I finally caught my breath, I got up. I had a rope burn that went from under my right ear all the way around my neck, under my left ear. We knew Poppy would have udder cream for that. So we got on our bicycles and we went down to Poppy's house. He went out to the milk shed and he got the udder cream. Have you ever used udder cream? It's got sarsaparilla in it. It smells like root beer. And he smeared it on my rope burn and he started smirking. He said, "I read that book." "How'd you get this red badge of courage?" We said, "We're playing Civil War." He said, "You ain't no Civil War veteran." Britt says, "How old are you?" Sit down. We sat down. He said, "You boys want to know something about the Civil War?" No, we did not. But we had been taught to respect our elders. So we said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Now, round here," he said, "there wasn't any of those big battles like Gettysburg." He said, "There were a few skirmishes, but nothing really significant. But there's a big old rock up on Layton Trail above the house called Rebel's Rock." We said, "Yeah, we know it." He said, "You know how that rock got its name?" "No, sir." He said, "Well, there was a Billy Yank and a Johnny Reb that got into it. They was fighting over a woman. That's what they was fighting over. They used the North and the South as an excuse to try to kill each other. And Billy Yank run Johnny Reb right up the side of the mountain, and before you know it, he come out on the top of that big rock, and there he was. He could throw himself to a sure death, or he could wait for Billy Yank to kill him with hot lead. But one way or the other, he's going to die." And then he paused for dramatic effect and could not help himself and said, "He was stuck twixt a rock and a hard place." So ha ha ha. And then he built all the tension back up again. We see this rebel soldier stand on the edge of this cliff, arms ready to go. And then he stops and says, "My teeth are loose." And got up and walked in the house. And stayed there for about 8 years. Never told us the rest of the story. I went on to junior high school, and then left Kentucky to go to college in South Carolina. I went back home one fall for homecoming at my high school. And of course, I went to see Poppy, because that's what you do. He was sitting on the porch, because that's what he did. And he said, "You like school?" I said, "Yeah, I like school." Why do old people call college school? You know, like, what'd you do kindergarten through 12th grade? That was nothing. You know, college is school. "You like school?" "Yes, sir, I like school." He said, "You still studying that theater?" I said, "Yes, I am a theater major. I'm studying that theater." He said, "I don't hold that theater." That was true, he did. We sat for a little while, and he said, "They got storytelling at your school?" I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, they do. There's an elective class in storytelling, and theater majors are highly encouraged to take it." He said, "That's what I'd do, take that storytelling if I was you." I don't know what I'd talk about. He said, "You tell them about Rebel's Rock?" I don't know the end of it. He said, "Oh." He jumped. And after he let me just sit there for a ridiculous long amount of time, he said, "Into a big old hemlock tree." And he scrambled down that hemlock tree and run off so he could fight that boy another day. Well, by this point in Poppy's life, he was an aged man and he had grown quite deaf. So we said little because it was just too much trouble. We just kind of sit and enjoy each other's company. So I didn't say anything else, and he didn't say anything else for a long time. And then finally he said, "You know how that boy knew there was a big hemlock tree he could jump into?" I said, "No. He didn't read it out in no book." I bet you his poppy told him. sat for a while longer. It got dark, and it was November, so it was cold. I got up and I said, Poppy, you better go in the house because it's dark and cold. And he just sat there. I thought, he's being stubborn. Fine. So I walked to the end of the porch to go. And I turned around and I said, Poppy, you better go in because it's getting dark. He still sat there. And I turned and I heard him clear his throat, and I realized when I looked back, he had heard me the first time. And he was not so much being stubborn as he was trying to say something that I had never heard him say before. And finally, probably because of his deafness, he blurted it out much louder than he intended to. And he said, I love you. And you don't read that in World Book Encyclopedia. That's good. That's never happened to me before. So when I call my wife, how's it go? Say, well, I blew my glasses right off the top of my head. So that'll work out good. All right. So Lauren mentioned, he said there's sort of a recurring theme running here. So let me go back to those dead people that they started this concert with. People ask me if I tell ghost stories, and I say yes, but only a few. Most of the time, you all are storytellers. You very much know. When people ask for ghost stories, they're looking for like, and I don't do that kind of stuff. What's genuinely frightening to me is like I like to tell about the night Abraham Lincoln was murdered. That is scary to me. That's just scary stuff. That kind of stuff. But there is one particular ghost story that I stumbled across in an old anthology when I moved to Charleston, South Carolina. I was plundering through the local lore section of the historic library. And I thought, now that one speaks to me. And when we saw the theme kind of developing, I thought that'd be a good way to wrap up for two reasons. One, it's ghost. Two, it speaks to me. Three, it is 8:59. It's not a long ghost story. Don't look. If you're laying in your bed at night and you hear the rumble of wagon wheels or the clatter of horses' hooves, don't look. You hear a voice yell, step up there, get in line. You hear the heavy tramp, tramp, tramp of boots in the street. Just lay still in your bed. Don't get up to see who calls. Don't peek through the curtains. Don't open the shutter over the window. Oh, for heaven's sake, don't stand in the door gawking like you're looking at P.T. Barnum's traveling show. Don't look. You hear horses clopping up the street. They're straining against leather harness that pull the big heavy wagons in the cannon. Just lay still in your bed. Everybody knows what that is. That's the sound of the marching dead. Soldiers from the war. The last thing they knew was that General Lee needed reinforcements in Virginia. So on any given night, you never can tell when. Sometimes at the dark of the moon, sometimes at the bright full moon. You never know. They will muster a ghostly army and rise up from their graves, and they start marching northward toward Virginia. And you may hear them pass by your door, but if you hear them, don't look. Now there's also the singing dead. The old plantations, lots of them were deserted after the war. And then they were found by northeastern industrialists. They were bought up and used as hunting preserves. So in the fall of the year, men go riding out over those old plantations, across the old rice fields, and sometimes their horse steps on the grave of a fallen soldier. There's no tombstone marking his final resting place, and so he sings out beneath the moss and ferns to let you know he is there. It's usually one of those old songs of the South, like Bonnie Blue Flag, When Johnny Comes Marching Home. You could try to sing along, but it's not a major key, and it's much more macabre than minor. Don't sing. And then there are the thirsting dead. They reach out to touch you, so to speak. Some of those old houses, completely abandoned after the war, were taken over by squatters. One night, a squatter woman sent her daughter down to the well to fetch back a pitcher of water. The girl went to the well with the water jug. She pulled up the wooden bucket. She poured the water over into the urn. And she lifted the urn up, and she started for the house. And just as she put her her first foot down on the front porch step, that jug was lifted out of her hand. And all by itself, it moved through the air and it tilted, and a silver stream trickled down toward the floorboards and just disappeared from sight. This was followed by a long, satisfied sigh, as if a thirsty man had been given a cool drink of water. Then the jug righted itself. It moved a little further. It tilted again, and the stream trickled out. This happened over and over again as the jug went all the way around that long piazza, came back to the girl's hand, bone dry. She was so scared she dropped the jug and it shattered. When she went in the house and told her mother what had happened, her mother said, "Oh, that's just a thirsty dad." They take in death what they did not receive in life. This house was a field hospital during the war. You might have noticed the bloodstains in the back room. Men were laid out on that piazza waiting to see a surgeon. Many of them died from nothing more than thirst, from lack of a cool drink of water. You just have to go fill the pitcher again. The girl explained she couldn't. She dropped it and it broke. But when she went outside, there was that pitcher sitting upright in the middle of the steps, completely mended, with a silver rim. The thirsting dead, they always have their own way of saying thank you for a cool drink of water. Now the thirsting dead, the singing dead, and the marching dead, they won't hurt you. They don't mean you any harm. They just want you to know they are there. And as long as you sing the old songs and tell the old stories, if you do that within their hearing, they know they are not forgotten. Nobody's really dead if you know their name. And they can lay still and rest in their graves. But should you ever stop telling the old tales and singing the old songs, don't be the least bit surprised if they muster a ghostly army and they go marching northward toward your door. And for heaven's sake,